my partner bought me a camera for Christmas, and we thought I could use it for TikTok, but I can't really use it for TikTok. I can really only use it for YouTube. So I try and make sure and use it. But
yeah, TikTok is finicky like that.
Yeah, well, on TikTok, you have to have like a live stream access thing. And they finally gave me access to their live streaming studio. The first live I did in their studio, my viewers went from 100 to 10. And they haven't been above 20 cents.
Oh, wow.
And so I tried to get the streaming key because that's what I really wanted, so I could stream both through the same camera. And I still can't get the streaming key. So it's like I need to get them to turn off my live studio access. Like, take it away, take it back. I don't like it. You can keep it. Yuck.
Well, remember not to do that then.
Yeah. If you get it, don't take it. So I took it, but then I used it, and it was fine until I actually used it. Like I did 2 lives right after my hysterectomy, and because they gave it to me while I was getting my hysterectomy, pretty much. It's like, okay, I'll try it. And and I thought it would give me the key. It's like, yes, that's what I've been waiting for. So I did 2 lives, and those lives were fine. And then I downloaded the thing on my computer and tried to use it so that I could stream through both of them, and it would not do it for me. Like it just dropped it instantly streaming from my computer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it might not be the access. It might be the studio that they use. And I'm not sure which.
Got it. Makes sense.
If you get it. Those are the options of safety. I hope everybody's day is going good. And if there's anybody else who wants to speak, I do have some requests. I put them on the wall this time so that we can all make sure, including myself. Please mute your mic when not talking. Allow others to speak fully. Women speak first, and we always speak with respect to each other. Just because I know that sometimes we can get impassioned, and sometimes in our impassionment, I'll overspeak people, or people can get, argumentative or things like that. And just to make sure, and we were doing it I did this for after last week's lives, I did it. And because I figure sending those boundaries up front will make me feel safer, allowing people I don't know up in boxes. Because I'm very big on I don't like being screamed at. Nobody likes being screamed at. Don't scream at people. I can get loud if you're going to get loud and talk over me, but don't scream, yeah. And then we are speaking today specifically about North and South America, Turtle Island and Abya. I'm working on that pronunciation. If I'm incorrect, I encourage correcting. And hopefully we'll have a good discussion about, and I'd like to, I see that there's a few issues that we're dealing with. And then on like a large scale that I think that we need to kind of work towards finding solutions for, right? And I don't believe I have any solutions. But I believe that when we come together, we find solutions, because I think that that's something that's worked throughout time in cultures who live in community and love of, the biome community. And so I want to make sure that those issues can be figured out, fixed, because it's just too much to live within them. And that's what I want to do with these. And if you do not know BGP, I'm shocked and amazed. And you really need to, you absolutely need to follow them, and then you will get to that side. But you really need to be following, because there's a lot of information. And actually, I you do DNA, and like your understanding of DNA is something that fascinates me. And I have wanted to do for a minute just a you and I discussion, like just because I want to talk about like there are things that I don't understand with DNA, and I know what I've been taught about it, but it doesn't mean that I have a deep enough understanding of it to figure out other stuff. And I'm like, I need to ask BGP about this so she can explain it to me.
Yeah, DNA is very complicated and can be very confusing, and even trying to explain it in layman's terms can be hard to do because it's so complicated in the way it is. And I've had to like dig deep into a lot of that and figure it out myself. But it's definitely not an easy. It's not an easy subject to break down to the layperson. So it is, especially when we're talking like ancestral DNA testing and things like that. To try to break that down as well it can be complicated. So I try my best, but even then, it's like, it can be difficult breaking down very complicated scientific subject matters. So, it's hugely complex. So, yeah. But what would you like me to help out with?
Well, the DNA stuff would be about like the ancient DNA and how they're tracing it. Absolutely. Just because of the migration patterns and stuff. And sometimes what's complicated about DNA for me is that it's a combination of letters and numbers that don't make a syllabic sound. So I can't place a name to it. Right. It totally blows it out of my mind. Today, though, I just wanted to talk mainly about, and it's not me talking, I wanted to open up platform and space, and give platform and space to people to talk about the things that are affecting us currently and are people's not ideas, but people's understandings of different ways forward, right? So that we can all share an understanding, right? And just open up a platform, basically.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm here to help assist with that, answer questions or anything like that. My platform right now has been really focused and centered on bringing awareness to the quote-unquote Southern Indigenous populations. Basically, even though Mexico is part of North America, we're still kind of considered Southern Indigenous peoples. So everything from the border and even parts of the Southwest United States all the way down into South America, and the erasure that a lot of people that we face and a lot of people don't recognize as Indigenous peoples. So that's one of my thing that I'm trying to center around now and bring more awareness to when it comes to that. The way the Spaniards colonized and the psychological trauma within that is there's a lot to unpack there. A lot to unpack there for many, many people. On top of the fact that it has affected both Indigenous people in community, from pueblos, from tribes, to detribalized natives, and those that they call quote unquote mixed. So it was a psychological colonization unlike others that I have seen, that is so deeply rooted that many people don't even realize how deep that erasure goes at this point. So trying to bring awareness and bringing out how deep that is kind of what my goal is right now with my platform. I saw it as a huge, huge problem with people not only trying to invalidate me, but also just not understanding the full historical context, and then not even understanding like how deep that erasure goes when it comes to even culture, and how many times our culture has been renamed, repackaged, refurbished into something else. And people are like, that's not Indigenous culture, or that doesn't stand from Indigenous people. And it's like, Yes, it does. And so when you start breaking that down and start showing that to people, people are like, oh, wow, I didn't know. And so to me, that's kind of concerning when I see so many people who really don't know their history and don't understand their culture and where it stems from. And so, and I was one of those people. So me waking up to that, like I've always known I was Native. I always knew I had Native ancestors. But the way I was taught and how many of us were taught was that we're not considered Native American because we weren't part of tribes. And it was only people who were in tribes. Those are the Native Americans. We just have ancestors. And when I started waking up to that's not actually true, was where I wanted to start waking other people up to that and to understand that history. So once I started really researching our history, when I really started understanding my culture as Indigenous culture, I wanted other people to understand that too. So that's kind of where my platform has been going out lately.
That makes total sense to me. Hi, Chico. I see that, and I think we're friends, but I haven't actually followed you back for some reason. But I think we've talked before. So welcome on up. And hi, Koshi. And I'm working on it. And I know it doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me. So I'm working on it. But hi, Koshi.
Greetings. I have my mic off because it's a little windy over now. But I'm here listening. Thank you for the invite. This is my original account. I finally got access to it, so I'm pretty happy about that.
What's up,
Gotcha,
Coach
ma'am.
Mickey? I added this account. I was like, why am I not already following him? What the heck?
Yeah, it's been inactive for a year. I have a bunch of messages and notifications. It's active now.
Wow. It's getting ugly out there with the erasure. I think that the colonizers, in my opinion, done quite the job at getting us separated, reclassified, and turning on each other and no, you're other, you're different, and we're not. At the end of the day, if you're indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, you're indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. This is a complex, multifaceted situation that we're dealing with here, isn't it? We've got people with valid indigenous ancestry invalidating other indigenous folks who are also valid. And then we all have to acknowledge openly that you don't have to be white to uphold white supremacy. So we see that even sometimes among our own people. And I think that when part of upholding white supremacy is othering our relatives, right? That's what they want out of us. This is something that bothers me on a personal level because I think I've been very open and honest about the fact that I had a pretty rough childhood. I had to go get therapy, deal with that, break some cycles. But basically, my mode of survival when I was a child, what kept me alive was Southern Indigenous folks. Although I'm Plains Native American, it was every taco I ate, every piece of fruit I was given, every bottle that was fed to me, every diaper change I got was from a Southern Indigenous person. Every hug, every bit of encouragement to keep my nose in the books and keep myself out of trouble came from a Southern Indigenous person. And no, they never invalidated my indigeneity. Yeah, we had jokes. Widda, you're so light, but they never invalidated my indigeneity. That's just kind of how we, I think a Southern Indigenous person would better be able to explain how that's just kind of like a joke or how do we put that, tease each other lovingly, but at the end of the day, I never saw my Southern Indigenous family as anything other than family, and that's how it should be. Anything other than that is weird to me. It's just fucking weird. And I don't understand why we Northern Indigenous folks aren't fighting harder. Not that some of us aren't fighting with all we got. With some of the, again, multifaceted. But it should really disturb us when we hear stories of them being invalidated as Indigenous peoples to these lands. A lot, not all, but a lot of Southern Indigenous tribes were migratory, as were a lot of us. It's not such a strange concept for even us to be migratory. But their ancestors are in the ground here as well as there. You know, they're literally our people. And it should be very, very upsetting and disturbing for us to hear that they're being mistreated and invalidated at our borders and treated as other, because they're not.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. We have to educate our people from both sides of the borders, right? Because our people, Mexican and Central American descent, they themselves feel that they're not from this continent. They don't feel indigenous, belonging to this land. So they have rude Eurocentric terms like Hispanic and Latino. So they themselves alienate themselves ignorantly from their right to be migrating.
I think that's.
What brought me up here when, excuse me, G was talking about like the erasure aspect of it, like, because when I was a little kid, I grew up in East LA. You know, most of the people in East LA come from Mexico. They're dark complected, and you know, they don't see themselves as indigenous because, you know, we think of ourselves as Mexicans, but not indigenous, because we think of indigenous as, you know, American natives. So we never, like, even though my father told me that I was indigenous when I was a little kid, that I had indigenous blood, it didn't stick with me because, you know, he said, you're not from here, you're from Mexico, though. Like, he said, oh, though, you're from Mexico. And that kind of, like, gave me, you know, it kind of, like, distinguished it in a way that was kind of, like, diminishing the value of it. And so, and then when you couple that with the idea that, you know, most people in Mexico, or a lot of people, I should say, in Mexico, I shouldn't say most because I don't know the percentage, but there's a lot of people in Mexico who are brown, who don't claim their indigeneity, and there's even indigenous populations who don't speak any Spanish, they don't speak any English, but they still don't claim indigeneity, and they live in Mexico. Like the erasure is real. Like I took a class in college that dealt with, you know, erasure in the southern and northern parts of the Americas, and you know there was it was a concerted effort. There was literature brought in, there was art brought in. They changed the any heroes that were brown or black to look white, to appear to be Caucasian. I mean, and like they wanted to wipe out the whole idea of being indigenous. They wanted white, not only like in the southern parts, and like BPG says, we say southern, referring to Mexico, even though Mexico is not Southern America. But even like when they're talking about those parts, they're I just lost my train of thought. But my point is that the erasure is real. It's systemic. It's still in our cultures today. It's still in the cultures in South and deep South America. You could see, like, if you just watch a TV show, if you watch commercials, if you just look at that, see who's represented, you know, in fashion, in media, you're gonna see white looking people that speak Spanish. You're not going to really see people with dark complexions. They're not going to be really highly represented in those types of you know jobs. So and in politics either, they're not going to be represented and that's where all the power is. So it's like something like I heard an argument on here the other day. I think Quachi was in the room and somebody, and it really got me. I couldn't get on the panel though because somebody was telling him Chicanos are coming from the southern border. We're gonna take over. I don't know what that guy was talking about, but like it's like that kind of like we don't have room for that type of hostility towards each other. We're like we're not. Or I mean, being our own worst enemy is is so counterproductive. Like that just speaks for itself. And the fact that we don't even understand what like Chicano means if you're saying Chicanos are coming from Mexico, because Chicanos are born in America. But the thing is, there's no difference. Like we didn't say that we're Chicanos because my dad raised me, told me I'm a Chicano. My dad told me a Chicano is a Mexican who was born in America and who has the dual life of the dual status of being Mexican and American, and lives that experience and lives out that experience throughout their lives. And that's what I did, so it's you don't have to be born in the United States, but most Chicanos are born in the United States. You could be born in wherever you are, whatever you're born in. And so my point is that he was coming in arguing about Chicanos taking over Indigenous or something like that. It was just so ridiculous. I was so upset. Like, why are we arguing? Like, why are we talking about, like people are like, I took a deep dive into my history. I found out that, my grandfather was more likely part of the Guamari tribe, which is under the umbrella of the Chichimueca. And my grandmother is hard to pin down because there was several tribes in Juarez, 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 Mexico, and so it's hard to pin down exactly which one she could be from. Two or three of them, and she's dead now, and all my uncles are gone. But they didn't know. I asked them; they didn't know where she was from. But I took a deep dive into my grandfather's, and I was able to trace his roots because he was born in Leon. Leon had great records. Juarez has terrible records, so I was able to find the history. So he's probably not like, if I was to get down to Mexico, which I'm going to do, and talk to some Chicos that are born down there, they would probably tell me a name of a tribe, not Guamares, because Guamares is part of a confederation. It's not just one tribe, so it would probably be a specific name that they would come. It's like I found when I was doing that, I found empowerment, looking up and finding my roots. Like I found like this is where I came from. Like I really know now. I can really feel this. It doesn't have to be from up here, but I really feel like
Right on, Chico. The argument on that live, it was that Chicanos were erasing other indigenous cultures because Mexico has 68 indigenous cultures that speak 364 variants. So the whole argument with them, I don't think so. I don't have no problem with anybody calling themselves Chicano or Mexican American. I identify as Mexican if I'm walking to a space where they're not too knowledgeable on identity, just to I'm Mexican, whatever. But if I want to get in depth, like when I'm in these spaces when it's about education, then I get more complex. I identify as Anahuaca, which is the equivalent of saying Native American, right? Anahuaca translates to people from the land between the waters. I also identify as Nicantlaca because that was the first term anybody in the Western Hemisphere used to identify as indigenous outside their tribal nations or civilizations, right? So colonialism was new to our people, and so our people had to regretfully identify as indigenous because now there's a foreign occupation asserting authority and asserting their own government's identity and culture. And our people had to say, no, we're indigenous, you're foreigner, you're not from this land. So that's how I identify as Nicantlaca. The reason I don't use like Native American, because like Hispanic and Latino, I'm uprooting Americo Vespucci, the Italian map maker in which this continent was named after. Plus, I have no relation to Americo. I'm not another Italian. The same thing with Hispanic and Latino. When we identify with Hispanic, we're identifying with the Southern Iberian Peninsula. When we identify as Latino, we're identifying with the Southern Europeans, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italian. In that context, when I was living in Mexico, I never called myself Hispanic or Latino. I was just another Mexican, right? So me growing up in Ciudad Juarez, being brown, I also was discriminated over there by the lighter Whitexicans, you might say. But they also have called me demeaning things like negro or Mimín Pingüín or Cirilo. Cirilo was a character in the novela, right? We're going back to the novela, where this black kid, you don't remember Cirilo? So, he was the little kid that everybody made fun of because he was black. He was in love with the European Spanish little girl, and the Spanish little girl rejected him. So I was in that context, I was made fun of. They called me Cirilo because I'm very dark. I'm still very dark. And when I would see the border, and see this whole other country, right, across where I live, when I cruise like downtown Juarez, and I'll be like, well, what is that? Well, why is there high rises there? What's going on over there? Why can't I cross that border? So I started wondering my own position in this land. And when I finally, my grandma, she would take me, cause she will work as a maid for a white person. So sometimes she would take me to work, and I would cross that border, and then I would see Europeans, right? Coming from a place where there was mostly brown people, because I also grew up in a neighborhood where there was Raramuri. So I grew up with an interaction with the Tarahumara. And being mostly dark Mexicans like me, and then going over here and seeing Europeans and looking at prosperity, looking at wealth, and or we didn't have any paved roads. It was just hills and desert and cactus and all that. And poverty, right, and violence, and a lot of bad things. So I'm crossing this border, and there's Europeans in prosperity, laughing, having abundance. And I will ask, why do I live here, and why are these people in such abundance? So that scenario itself, that border, made me question a lot of things about my life, my existence, and my people. And so I started digging when I got older and started digging up why we are poor people, why we're so how do you say it, affiliated with bad things like gangs and drug addictions and violence. And I started to realize that the root of all that is because of colonization. And then from my own background, residing with my Widda grandpa, with my Mexicanero grandpa, so I'm indigenous. So now I started digging up and getting educated where I could assert my identity and educate my people. Like that's why education is so important in how we identify and decolonize. So if we're identifying with Hispanic and Latino, we're uprooting a monopolization of the Southern Europeans. So if I cross a border, I have to respect the monopolization of that land, which was monopolized by the English. So now I'm rooting their legality and their self-entitlement authority over us, indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. So it's very important how we identify ourselves because identities have power. And one of the things that I remind my people a lot is that liberated and free people identify in what they empowers them. Slaves get slapped with labels by their masters. So, if we want to be truly liberated people, if we want to demolish artificial colonial divisions, identity is key to dismantling borders and nationalities, of course.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. One of the biggest things that I try to do is, in order for people to understand their identities, is for them to understand their history, um, which is what a lot of my page centers on is, going through that history and explaining what that real history is. I get a lot of comments throughout my videos where I hear from our own people, I did not know that, or this was the first time I heard about this, or I sort of knew, but I didn't know how deep it went. Um, these are the things that when you start digging into that and pushing away all the dust and all the crap that they have piled on top of it to make it whatever they wanted it to make it, is part of that erasure, right? And so having people understand that history allows people to really understand who they are and understand what their identity is. I get a lot of DMs throughout the day, from people just being like, this is, finally understanding what our history is makes me really want to learn who I am, learn about my people, learn about my roots. When we just tell people that, hey, colonialism caused this, in my opinion, we have to explain how that happened. We have to explain the trauma that went about. We have to explain what our ancestors went through in order for people to have that understanding. Because when you don't have that understanding, it doesn't hit, doesn't hit right. You don't you're just, a lot of people just see it as just another identity, or I don't feel, I hear this a lot, I don't feel like, I'm worthy enough, or I don't feel that, I don't want to take away from, real indigenous peoples. And it's like the constant of, stop invalidating yourself. You are still a real indigenous person. Especially when we're talking a lot about with those that had that mixed ancestry with the Spaniards. When you look at other marginalized groups that have mixed ancestry, when you're looking at their second, third, or fourth great grandparent that was of European descent, nobody calls them mixed. They're not mixed people. They're like, oh, you're mixed. You're this. You're mestizo. You're mulatto. You're this, that, and the third. Nobody does that. Nobody imposes that onto them. But that has been so deeply rooted and ingrained into us that to this day we are still being called mixed. And I tell people all the time, I'm not mixed. I am a Mexican Indigenous person that has mixed ancestry, but both of my parents were Mexican. All of my grandparents were Mexican. All of my great-grandparents were Mexican. My 2 times great-grandparent was Spaniard. And then, even my 3 times great-grandparents, they were Mexican. They were quote-unquote mixed. There was all that mix that was happening way before I ever existed. So I'm not mixed. I don't have a Spanish mother and a native father or vice versa. It's that when you look at what the casta system was, it applied to first generation, and that was to remove people from their indigeneity. And then they upheld that, and they continue to uphold that, because when you actually look at that casta system, if you were born mestizo, and then as a mestizo, quote unquote, had a child with a Spaniard, that child was not considered mestizo anymore. That child was then considered castizo. So it was a new classification. So how is it that when you even base it off of the casta system that we're still mestizos generations later? We're not. And to get people to relinquish those terms, you have to have them understand the history behind those terms. Because otherwise you're just saying, you're not this, and that's a colonial term. And then they're like, okay, but I'm still that. And you have to explain why that term came about. You have to explain the erasure behind it, the dehumanization behind it. You have to explain what Hispanic and Latino and all of these things mean, in order for, and the history behind all of these things for them to know. When I tell people all the time to not homogenize Latinos, because we're not all the same people, they don't get it. They don't understand it. And then I have to explain that why. I have seen literally European Latinos that pose as Latinos who claim to have a marginalized experience when they don't. They're full Europeans hiding behind the term Latino, because so many brown people are considered Latino, which is part of that reclassification. And that term Latino actually upholds the casta system and pushes proximity to whiteness that none of us will ever achieve. With the terms of proximity to whiteness and all of these things, yes, many people would like that, but people have to understand that they're not going to achieve it. Because at the end of the day, if everybody darker than you is gone and you are still here, those that are still lighter than you are going to treat you bad. So it doesn't stop just because you're a little bit lighter skinned than those that are darker skinned. It doesn't stop, and that's what we have to get people to understand, that psychology. That if you are allowing yourself to have to uphold the privilege that because you're a lighter shade of brown, don't forget that if everybody darker than you disappears tomorrow, you will then be the darkest person. You will then be that most marginalized person. So that is where we have to get people to understand that proximity to whiteness only harms those darker than you. It doesn't give you any benefit as a light-skinned brown person at all. And it never will.
Right. But I'm going to drop because I'm breaking up real bad. But thank you for having me. And
Thank you for coming in, Chico. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to meet you. One thing that really struck me in my memories when BGP was talking when you were talking the first time, I think I didn't really know a lot about South America or Abya Yala prior to college. And when I was in college, I was taking some classes on it. And when I was taking classes, we were reading something, I can't even remember what specific author it was, but it was a journal of what had happened slightly later in the start of the colonization of the islands, I think. And it was talking about the women that had been taken to wife, and they were talking about, how they cooked and different things like that. And they were talking about how they would build these great big fires and put different like smoke things on it, different things to make smoke. And the perspective that they were, coming across with as European colonizers within this journal was very straightforward. They didn't really, they thought it was, cleansing the air of mosquitoes and things like that. And as I was reading it, what really struck me was like, I feel like they were cleansing the air to get the demons to leave. like how to drive out the evil in an area, use air cleansing, and when I look at the differences in the way the Spanish colonized and the way the French colonized and the way that the Americans colonized, what was happening in the places that the Spanish colonized was an entirely different level of nightmare, I think. Here, there is a focus on sterilizing women, a focus on not creating any more children, right? A focus on eradication in that way. And in other spaces where in spaces where the Spanish colonized, there was this focus of essentially breeding people out, like taking the Spanish to wife, but killing the men in a lot of instances, or putting the men to work. And so that the damage done is a completely different damage done on a psychological level. And I think that that's something that has to be understood, that the colonization, it's not the same. It's just, it doesn't affect on the same level. It doesn't almost, I guess, try and erase, I guess is the best phrase, almost try and erase on the same level. Like the different ways of erasure are so huge that not recognizing that, it just closes you to a lot of knowledge. And if you project that and you're creepy or shitty about it, it just is worse. And then when we look at who was here, so there's like Proto-Dene, which means like it's the root language of Dene, and then many other languages. And that stretches from like the southern tip of Mexico up into the plains, the Great Plains, and then starts again in Upper California and goes up into almost, I think, to Alaska. I'm not sure if it's into Alaska. And what that shows us is that there's these migration patterns and these movements that are constant. And to assume that because somebody is coming in and imposing a border, that somebody is no longer a part of that land or a part of that space is really, I'm not even sure what the best verbiage for it is, but it's just not very appropriate. Like there's better verbiage, I'm sure, but it's not the appropriate way to look at it. It's not the appropriate way to see it. There is so much movement and so much trade and so much, interconnectedness there that we have to recognize. And yeah, I don't think that I could have ever not seen it. I mean, I think it's so obvious on so many levels too. And none of that interconnectedness makes anything homogenous, because all cultures are distinct and unique. It just means that we definitely have familial ties to different spaces in this land than we think that we do. And we have to recognize that colonization affected us all on a deeply different level, to be able to recognize and uphold each other. And it only, I've said before, and I mean it on a global scale too, but I mean it on a micro scale too. Only land back for one only works with that land back for all. It has to work in concert for it to do anything for the globe, for it to do anything on a broader scale. So we have to ensure that that understanding is on a broader scale than just ourselves.
Well, I speak a lot on that. Like when you brought up the erasing of bloodlines, right? So I look at it. I try to also look at the psychological perspective of that. So scientifically, DNA studies do show that when we're looking at that Spaniard bloodline that came in and into the Caribbean, South America, and Mesoamerica, that Spanish bloodline came in through male DNA. So when you're looking at mitochondrial DNA, Y DNA, right? Mitochondrial DNA is the female line, Y DNA is the male line. You don't see a strong presence of Spanish DNA in the mitochondrial lineage. You don't. But you do see a strong presence of Spanish DNA through European DNA through the male lineage. And part of this was due to the fact that it was mostly men, conquistadors, that came over, and they had their way with women. A lot of the times, when we talk about SA, people think of it in the most barbaric sense, right? They think of it as they just grabbed women and just started SAing them. No, what they did was they took young girls and married them and forced these marriages onto these young girls, and then that's how they started separating and detribalizing many Southern natives. Was they took the young girls, they married them, and then they started having children with them. And those children, then their idea was, now these children have Spanish bloodlines. Now we remove, in some instance, because they have indigenous bloodlines, that means our children can have claim to these lands because they're native. That means we are now connected to these lands because they also have our bloodlines. Then that continued, and it was like, so now that we have that connection, now we can breed out the bloodline. We don't need them anymore because we already have that connection now. So you have that. On top of the fact that if you removed us from our tribes, if you removed us from our people, you caused that division, and now the psychological aspect comes in, right? It's this whole idea that so many of us, even to this day, that we deal with within our own families. That whole blood is thicker than water type of ideology, even though that saying is completely wrong and misconstrued. But it's that's what they push. The whole blood is thicker than water. Meaning that even if you are my family, if you are my brother, my sister, my cousin, my tia, my tío, my grandparents, my parents, and you treat me bad, I still must accept you because you are my family. No matter what, I still have to forgive you. We have to figure out a way to get along. I still must love you because you are my family. And family always comes first because you are blood related. And no matter what, no outsider that doesn't have our blood comes before us. That was the psychology that they placed on us, and that still is upheld to this day. To this day, I see it, where even in my own family, yeah, I know, mija, but remember, that's still your cousin. I don't care. That's a horrible person. I don't claim them as my cousin. They may be blood related to me, but that's not my people. That's not my cousin. I don't claim. I have people who are non-blood related to me who I'm closer to than that person, So it's still upheld very deeply psychologically within generations 500 years later. And then that comes into play when we're talking about the whole quote-unquote mestizo, Hispanic, Latino. It's still part of who we are. We still have to embrace that. To deny that is to deny part of you. All of those types of things, right? That makes us uphold this fantasy version of who the Europeans were towards our people. Because that psychology is still very deeply, deeply rooted. And you have to break that toxicity and generational trauma, which is very hard for a lot of people to do, especially since again, we've been taught that therapy is bad. We have that machismo aspect to our culture. You don't talk about your problems. You keep all your problems within the family. Things get swept under the rug. We don't talk about the bad people that did bad things. Those are secrets. Don't tell anybody. That's our business. Those types of things. And that festers all of that, which then keeps us at the root of it all, keeps us removed from who we are as Indigenous peoples. And then as we are distracted from all of these things, we are no longer focused on fighting for our lands, fighting for our people, deconstructing and decolonizing our mindsets and who we are, and having that unity between Indigenous peoples across the board. And this is true for everywhere. And so these are things, when we're talking about Spanish colonization, it wasn't just the physical brutality, it was the psychological warfare that they placed onto us and still continue to uphold. You still see it to this day, where I've come across lives of Spaniards that are pushing Hispanista. They are pushing this idea of, they still don't call us Spaniards. They will never call us Spanish, ever. We are still mixed to them, and they will tell us that, but they will say it in a way that we will accept you, we will take you in, we will love you and embrace you, because those Indigenous people don't. And then when you have our own people saying you're not Indigenous, or you're not Indigenous enough, what do? You are pushing them towards the very people that have caused harm, and you push them away into a mindset that they're like, well, if my people over here don't want to accept me, I'll go where I'm accepted. But the thing of it is, those people don't accept them either. They're just playing a game with them. They're playing that psychological warfare of, hey, come over here, do what we say, stand by our side, help us keep oppressing, and we'll accept you as is, and that proximity to whiteness occurs. So these are the things that we have to watch out for psychologically, and also teach our people to understand that psychological game and warfare, because that's how deep it goes. And so when we're looking at the physical studies of DNA and how that occurred, when we're looking at the psychological reasoning behind it, and then you look at the totality of why so many people are just barely now figuring out who they are, on top of the erasure of history, the revised history. I said in a video the other day, this whole idea of the victors are the ones who write history, the winners are the ones who write history. I cannot stand that saying. To me, the saying should be, the oppressors have suppressed history. They didn't write it. They suppressed it, because our history is still very much alive. It's there through written history, archaeological evidence, and oral history, and family stories. It's still very much there. It's just being suppressed. So they didn't write anything. All they did was suppress, and then made their fantasy version come to life. And that's what they did. So these are the things that I'm trying to get people to look at a deeper level psychologically. And then understand why that history came to be and how it happened. When I feel that is a way, it's not the be all end all, and it's not the only way to help decolonize and help people figure out their roots, but I do feel it is one way, and a major way, to get people to understand who they are and where they come from, and to finally get in touch. Because once you get in touch with your roots, once you figure out where you come from, where you come from in that ground, that you are attached to these lands, you then have something to fight for. You then have something to say, this is who my people are, these are who my ancestors are, and you start to be confident in your identity. And when you're confident in your identity, then you have your voice is loud, and your voice is able to speak out in many different ways, whether it's through social media platforms, whether it's through activism, whether it's boots on the ground, whether it's behind the scenes, whether it's through education in the classrooms, whether it's through in what I do as a nurse, and advocating for my people in the medical setting, and fighting against medical racism and scientific racism. All of these things play a role in deconstructing and decolonizing our people, and having them get, in a sense, an identity of who they really are. So
with that said, I would also like to talk about eugenics. It's something that is not talked about a lot, and how it contributes to the colonization of our people. Well, we do know about the caste system, right, which was implemented in the early 1800s, where they were trying to make SLAVE race, but with with high European aesthetics. So the more light complexity you were, the more favorable you were at this class structure, right? Which was the caste system. Uh, and that caste system has basically follow up to today, right? Now we got racist philosophers in Mexico, like Jose Vasconcelos, who stated that the only way that we could exist as people was to bred with Spaniards, right? And that we weren't destined to exist if it wasn't for that, for Western civilization. And that has affected us psychologically as well, because now we got this concept of marrying up, right? To uphold and uproot everything that is white and love everything that is white. So our people, I don't know how many of you have heard this racist ideology to say, marry a light complex person with blue eyes so our people can better themselves, right? Who taught us that? And that's where we need to question why do we have that mentality? And it goes back to
something that's not talked about enough. Eugenics is so much a foundation of this country that it's like embroiled in so much of what we do, and it's embroiled in policies they're making today. Really, it ties into everything because it really ties into racism. Like the theory of race and the theory of eugenics are hand in hand in every step, and it is absolutely about trying to create some form of pinnacle or purity or top, or and it absolutely harms on every possible level for every possible human being it comes in contact with. um, we don't talk about it enough. I try not to, like, I haven't done a whole live or something else on it, and I probably should, but I don't really focus usually on the forward. But yeah, it's people don't even realize what an effect, how long the effect lasted. Like there are still areas where there are laws on the books that state that interracial couples cannot marry. Um, uh, there are still, or they changed laws in like the 70s or 80s when they stopped, when they said that they stopped forced sterilizing Turtle Island Indigenous women is about the same time that they also said that they stopped forced sterilizing any woman that they could deem to be hysterical or having a mental defect, or and that could include being too promiscuous.
Or talking back to men.
Yeah, like so it's so we're still overturning laws that were created by eugenics, and we're still dealing with laws that were created by eugenics on a day-to-day basis. It's huge.
If I may, in the midst of all of this, with regards to detribalized or disconnected valid Indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, I just want to emphasize and highlight, if you will, existence is resistance. Okay. My son and I were talking about this because we're connected. A lot of other folks aren't. We're planning on moving back down to Southern California, so we're going to be running into a lot of my friends and adopted family who will be detribalized, but they're still Indigenous, and we were talking about the importance of validating their indigeneity when the subject happens to come up, and it's just reality. At the end of the day, if they're indigenous, they're indigenous. Nobody is the arbiter of who is indigenous enough, right? And we can have good people and bad people of every ethnicity and race. Okay, somebody doesn't have to fit my narrative, your narrative, or anybody else's narrative. Now, being a member of a tribe is a whole different. That's a whole different. But at the end of the day, we look at things. A lot of folks, especially on TikTok, I'll say this. Some people aren't going to like this, but it's true. Cultures change throughout the years, be it forced or otherwise. That does not mean that these people are not indigenous. What was forced upon them through no fault of their own does not invalidate their indigeneity. Time has passed. There's nothing that we can do about the past. We can move forward with trying to connect with our ancestors and doing the homework, and that's great. But at the end of the day, nobody owes anybody else any homework. You are who you are. They said when I was growing up, you'd say, soy como soy, I am what I am. And that's that. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be trying to connect with our ancestors. We absolutely should. That's best, right? That's what worked for thousands and thousands of years. It's always a good idea, but not being connected to anybody's standard does not invalidate that person's heritage, right? If they're going to be hard-headed, if they're going to take that colonized mindset and they're going to be like, well, I'd rather do this way, and just completely ignore their indigenous, that's just a mean person. You know what I mean? That's just somebody willfully ignorant. That doesn't mean that they're not of indigenous ancestry. And then we have other people who are working so hard to connect with their ancestors, and that's their own journey. Each person has their own path, right? Every tribe is different, and for those who've had their tribes completely, like, all records are lost, and there's no way for them to know exactly how their ancestors lived and their customs exactly the way that they were. Then those people are an accurate representation of their people today because they're standing right in front of you. They exist. Okay. Obviously, always try, but this is a multifaceted. There's no one definition. You understand? There's no one standard, and every standard for each tribe. Someone asked me, they were like, I'm a certain percentage of this tribe. I'm not going to say a tribe because it doesn't matter. Does that mean that I'm this tribe? And I was like, look, at the end of the day, you have to contact that tribe, but whatever's left of those people who are here, and check what their standards are. But nothing is going to invalidate the fact that you are, if you're a valid descendant of those people, then it's in your blood. Nobody can come and repossess your indigeneity. It's not going to happen. They don't have a way of doing that. Otherwise, they would have tried to do that already. I don't think anybody should be holding everybody accountable to their standard of what is indigenous enough. Does that make sense? Tribal member, that's different because you got to be connected to say I am a member, because that's saying that you're a member of a sovereign nation. You're a citizen of a sovereign nation. But as far as everything else goes, and just being indigenous of indigenous ancestry, I mean, you are who you are. I can't change that. Whether I like you or hate you, it doesn't matter. And like I said, if all records are lost and you are validly indigenous and you're doing the best you can, I mean, then you are a valid representation of people because you are your people. Certain tribes change customs throughout the year. Some forced, a lot forced, right? But some willingly as well. My tribe, we used to have a tradition. I'm not going to bring it up, but we had a ceremony that we used to do. We no longer do it, and that was not because of colonization. That was because we decided we're changing this, and cultures change through times, and that's okay as long as it's that people's decision to make that change. Anything that was forced, of course, try to undo that, try to fix it. But also remember that there are some things that we chose to do because, either be it for survival or just convenience. one way or the other, or just a belief change. People change. Whole peoples change. Never invalidate somebody else's indigeneity because they don't fit your mold. They don't fit your stereotype. Understand that we as Indigenous people, sometimes when we get into that colonized mindset, we can start holding each other accountable, or there's a measuring stick that the colonizer showed us, and they said, listen, you fall here on the measuring stick, so you have to look at the rest of your people the same, and put this measuring stick next to them, and wherever they fall is wherever they fall. We didn't make that measuring stick. We didn't have that measuring stick before. We didn't care about the measuring stick. You know, you are who you are no matter what. I'm trying to tell people, but nobody's going to listen to me, man. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s, you know? But at the end of the day, we really need to stop doing that, because we're doing the colonizers' work for them when we do that. We have detribalized Indigenous people here in the U.S. We have detribalized people in Mexico and South America. We got, you know, and we need to remember that before all of this, we didn't have this measuring stick, and we didn't want this measuring stick. The first thing we need to do to decolonize is get rid of that damn measuring stick, because it's dividing us. It's splitting us right into different little bitty pieces.
Well, I agree. I mean, as long as there's only, you know, so many people who are recognized as having that connection, then we're all but erased, right? If we can understand that and stop taking it as, you know, exclusion instead of including everybody who has that ancestry and understanding, then we're still here in numbers, right? Like, it's not just that we're still here, but we're still here in mass, right? Like, really, you gonna take all of us? Like there's a lot of us, right? Like, if it's not just one of us, it's a lot of us. That to me in itself should be like a no-brainer, right? To me, that in itself should be the more people on my side, right? Like, I don't understand that part. And I mean, fuck, I don't know why TikTok
You
is
look
weird.
at MMIW, and you look at ICWA and the purpose for ICWA. 1 + 1 is 2 at the end of the day. Like I used to work with a woman who did the Cherokee Princess thing, right?
Yeah.
And she thought she was lying to me. She thought she was lying. She thought she was BSing me. And I was reading her features, and I was like, I do see Indigenous in her, but I don't see Cherokee. She looks Lakota to me. I know these features well because I have, you know, friends and family, and I have some Lakota descendancy, you know, and I just kept my mouth shut, and I just like, interesting. Yeah, why don't you look deeper into that? Why don't you look deep? You should look deeper. That's no. It's your birthright. Look into that. Because I wanted her to look. You know, there was a part of me that just didn't like her because, you know, that's rude.
Yeah.
But then there was a part of me that was like, this is a lost. At some point, 1 or 2 of her ancestors were stolen, or they ran away out of fear, trying to, you know, stay alive, right? Because I could see it. And as it turns out, one of her family members came to visit. Subject came up. Turns out she had registered or enrolled family members with that tribe. She was not Cherokee. She was Lakota. And she really didn't know it because she hadn't asked questions. They kept it quiet because they didn't want to have to deal with oppression. And they had felt like once you got to a certain skin tone that you were going to be invalidated anyway. And I hate the thought of that because, like, you know, mixed or not, Like, you should be proud of all your ancestry that you can be, you know?
Yeah.
There are those who have a European ancestry that was forced into their bloodline. My grandfather actually married my grandmother, and it was a valid relationship. He was German Jewish, you know? So, like, I claim him, but I can see why somebody wouldn't claim their forced ancestry, you know, lineage in there. That's up to you. That's a personal thing, but you know, historically, you know, Indigenous people didn't force themselves onto others. That wasn't, that we were the ones having it forced upon us. And that's something that someone should be proud of. The fact that we were good people, we have survived this long, and no matter how your ancestors survived, they made it, you're here. You should always claim it. If you know for a fact that you have Indigenous ancestry, I urge you, just look into it, man. Just look into it, because, you know, our numbers on paper look small, but I agree. We have a lot more people out there than what is validated on paper, and that's just, that was forced on us. We can't even claim who we are without oppression. You know, fight it. There's so many of us right now. I mean, they could never really do anything about it if we all stood up.
I have to step away for just a moment, but I will be right back.
Before you step away, I just want to thank you for letting me come up. I appreciate you. I am going to drop. I kind of just woke up from everything, so I have to kind of get my day started. There's some stuff I have to do, but thank you guys for always having me. I'll stay in the comments and listen and try to contribute to the conversation as I get up and take a shower and do all the things, you know, people normally do in the mornings that I got to do now. So anyway, y'all have a good day, and I will talk to y'all later.
You too, sister.
Later.
Thank you so much. That's actually why I have to go, because my partner's waking up for his grave shift. So I'll see you later. Thank you so much for coming up, and I'll see you in the comments.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye. Coach, I think what you're doing is wonderful. I think connecting our Southern Indigenous folks to their heritage is paramount to our further existence in this hemisphere as Indigenous peoples. Claiming our heritage is not just for us individually, but for us as a group, as a community. That sets precedent, you know, like, hey, there's so many of us, you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah, no, I knew you were going to go get
This is part of the work that needs to be done to decolonize this hemisphere. That's the only way to heal this area.
Are you coming back after the vacation?
Yeah, but I come from a background of despair, so like a lot of people,
Okay, so the real liquor store can come back.
I have lived colonialism and experienced racism,
when you come back,
and inequality, insanity, a lot of bad things, right? And what I have found out, the answers to what afflicts me is what has brought a solution, a vision of a solution forward. So I have vowed to my whole existence, as long until my lifetime expires, I'm always going to be at least planting a seed for people to envision a liberated future, right? Well, because ultimately, why are we doing this? Are we to conform to exist as we are? Are we got to the point where we're comfortable existing with racism within our own people and experiencing racism from other foreign people? Are we to conform to being impoverished? Are we to conform to gang culture? Don't know about a liberated future because nobody not a lot of people is talking about liberation. You know, people talk about reconnecting, which is good. I'm not saying that it's not good. But honestly, in this people trying to plant a seed of liberation, there's not a lot of people doing that. So that's my role. And I might sound like a broken record, but I do come from a background of protesting since I was a labor union member, where that's where I learned how to protest, organize, and rally, boycott, and whatnot. So I happen to be that broken record because I know that our people don't have that vision because they don't put that vision on us. You know, we're too conformed to our current existence. And yeah, I agree, we can survive. But we're just colonized people seeing our whole existence passing by with colonized eyes, where we can be more than that. We can actually be living, be truly living without insanity, as sane people, without experiencing racism, without experiencing poverty, experiencing inequality, without experiencing prejudice and genocide. We were people like that before colonization, right? And as we live right now, we're just seeing we're seeing other people live in prosperity, and while we remain colonized. And I don't think that's a good way to exist. I don't think we should. Well, I don't think we should exist another 500 years as colonized people. Not even 200 years. I think 200 years more of being colonized it's enough. Well, that's why my whole focus in waking up the so-called Hispanic and Latino is because once Hispanics and Latinos make a big demographic in the Western Hemisphere. So if I wake up my people to their identity, now they're gonna be sympathizing with, why are they building pipelines over here and displacing and poisoning the water of indigenous people? Oh, I'm indigenous. I'm gonna go contribute and stand against white supremacy. The same with northern plain indigenous people. Once they wake up to the truth that we are indigenous as well, so they see this crisis at the border or racist laws that are targeting Mexicans. Now they're gonna have a sympathy. Oh, yeah, those are my people too. So it's a mass awakening that I'm trying to propagate, to wake up my people. So every person that I wake up to this reality with education and a Nahuatl-centric education, because it's enough. We have enough. We see everything regrettably through a Eurocentric lens, regardless if you're tribalized or detribalized. The Eurostate does not limit to just me. It limits to all indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And that's how we perceive our reality, through a Eurocentric lens. So it's enough of that, and it's time for us to start having our own lens on our own reality and stop letting people dictating what our reality is. So every person that I wake up to this reality, that person now will become a weapon of mass liberation. So that's what I focus, and that's what I have about my whole life from this point until my life tag expires, is for the liberation of our people.
So I've been, I don't know if you stayed long enough in the live that you cruised through last night, where I was talking about, I brought up Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky said that the very English language that we're speaking over here, right? It's not even a natural way to speak. It's not a natural language. And I understand that every language that we have alive, quote unquote, alive today and in use is some sort of mix of, blend of whatever was close to there, right? Like we all had to adjust because communication is important. It has to do with trade and everything else. But English, the way Noam Chomsky says, and he's a linguist. He knows what he's talking about. It made sense. The way that language is put together, it doesn't follow a normal human pattern of speech, or communication, if that makes any sense. And he said, it's creative and whatnot, but it seems to be put together in such a way that is classist at best, if not racist. Devised to separate us. So even the very language that we speak, and not just because it was pushed upon us, because many of us speak different languages, our ancestors did, right? Many ancestors here on Turtle Island, we spoke different languages. So we had to, in order to communicate, a lot of us picked up on the languages of the tribes around us. So speaking a language other than our own language is not uncommon necessarily, but the English language in and of itself is not natural for us, not natural for anyone. But when it was pushed upon us, that further oppressed us, because then they were able to condescend to us. Now, Spanish was utilized in the same way, and to this very day, I see people who have maybe a different dialect, and maybe they've got a dialect that they picked up from the reservation where they grew up. It's just they don't talk a certain way, or they have a certain accent, or they pronounce things a certain way. Then they're condescended to, right, by others, and they're like, oh well, I'm better. And growing up, I would hear like the difference between Spanish in the classroom versus what I heard from my friends, right? Two different dialects. And then I would see people say, well, you're not speaking proper Spanish. So, they would condescend to them. They would be disrespectful. And that's a tool as well of the colonizer to make us feel less than. And I don't think that that's something that we should put up with anymore either. I think we need to start taking back our languages and our thoughts and ideologies on language and communication, the way our ancestors did. It's okay to speak multiple language, good in fact, but to force ourselves to adhere to specific grammatical rules, and say that something is not valid because someone spelled something wrong, used improper punctuation, whatever. That's classist, and we need to start calling it out, because that's ingrained in our day-to-day life, right? And that's how we start changing minds, because we're not going to get anywhere without everybody being on board. So how do we get everybody on board? We start talking about it. We start saying, hey, that's classist, that's racist, that's not okay. They communicated effectively. You knew what they meant. Your way is not the end-all, be-all way. I'm not saying don't educate yourself. Educate yourself. Absolutely. But understand that education is subjective. The idea of a curriculum, and what is proper and quote-unquote correct, especially with something so subjective as communication, that's arbitrary, really. We need to check how we think day to day. I've been looking into just how we speak to each other, the quality of love and respect that we should be showing each other.
There definitely seems to be a lot of lack, and I feel it all too often. Like I'm trying my hardest to make sure that I speak to everybody with, beyond respect, with kindness. Like I think that I try and be respectful to everybody, but I try and make sure that I'm speaking with kindness and not, at the same time. There are days when somebody just triggers my trigger, and I'm not as kind as I want to be, or not as respectful as I want to be, or whatever else. And I feel like it's really, there are so many positives and negatives about being able to use a broader online community as a community, right? Like, so being involved in a broader online community actually has so many positive things. People are like, oh, social media. And yet social media definitely gives us the ability to interact on a broader scale that you're not going to get at any time period, right? Or any other space time period. And then it also, gives us the ability to understand more than we've ever understood before about different spaces and different peoples. It also gives us the opportunity to connect to people in a way that might be clear across the globe, that are even siblings, that we haven't, seen in a couple, like it gives us these different ways of doing that. And at the same time, it gives us these like conflicts that, we don't have to deal with as much, or we're dealing with in a different way, or become so much a part of are becoming so much a part of the mainstream that they become more conflicts than they would have been before, right? And so, are more problems than they would have been before. So I think it has so many of its positives and so many of its negatives. One of the big positives for me has always been the sense of community. And we have to recognize that. We have to overthrow that thing that just divides us, that because that is the colonized mindset, the declusion, not a part of you're not enough, that is such a colonizer mindset. When BGP was talking before she got down, she was talking about how the line tracing through the male lineage, for the places that the Spaniards colonized. That's a really big thing, right? You're looking at a group that, for them, their legality meant that men, like, you traced from father to son instead of from mother to daughter. And in spaces that they're colonizing, some of them trace from mother to daughter, so it totally looks at it in a different way. So one's tracing the roots and the other one's tracing the roots, and they're both tracing the roots to two different places, but they both have, like legitimacy in the way that they trace their roots, right? So we have to figure out a way to I have to figure out a way to speak in ways that I'm heard and I am understood, that it comes across in the best possible light, that I don't detract from anybody else, and that I still uplift the things that I need to uplift. And that is the hardest thing for me personally. And it seems to be for other people as well. Like when they talk about, trying to struggle with that. And, you just have to keep stumbling through it. I just have to, yeah. Today's one of those days I'm like, yeah, I'm right there. Like, bye TikTok. Like, it's just, you get those days you're like, yeah, I just don't want to deal with that anymore. Right.
Someone said something that kind of caught my attention last night. We were just having a good talk, right? Just talking about good and bad things, childhood, and it wasn't all Indigenous stuff. It was just life experiences, right? And another woman spoke up and she said, "This is like a talking circle. I really like it." I want to remind people about how important mental health is, okay? And how advanced our ancestors were with regards to healthcare, including mental health. The mindset of education for us at its foundation. You bring, in some tribes, you would bring tobacco to an elder and sit and listen as they taught you through oral dictation, right? So the child was grateful for the lesson. It put the child in the mindset of, I want to learn, right? And these fond memories, as you grow older, you would continue to go and learn when you needed to learn. And it wasn't looked down upon to not know something. Okay. You weren't, if you were ignorant of something, as long as you weren't willfully ignorant, that's okay. It happens. And, you just go and get the lesson. And education was freely given, right? So was healthcare, including mental health. Sometimes those talking circles were for mental health purposes. We talk about good medicine and bad medicine in a lot of places. That's in reference to, the spirit or the way things are said or put and the impact that they have, right? Like, there are certain things that we can say that instantaneously bring negativity into the room, right? And when someone would do that in the past, because like humans are humans, we all make mistakes, right? We all say things the wrong way, and no matter what, you get together and you talk about it, and mental health was preserved that way. It was taken seriously. How you treated one another day to day, it wasn't just about formality. It was the reason the custom was there for certain formalities was because it preserved life, including mental health, and the way that we treated each other preserved our people on so many different levels. Not just, I hear a lot of people talk about diet, right? And that's really important. Diet's important. Exercise is important. So is the way that we treat one another. Being concerned for one another and taking people's mental health into context when we're addressing them. If you have to teach somebody something, like I say, I can't be a leader in any of this because, like, I got a mouth, I'm not always the best at it. I got things I'm working on for me. But I see people like BGP and Coach Miki, they can stay level, right? Like, they're good at that. So if somebody needs to hear some words, sometimes I send them to them. I'll send them to you for a lesson because you're pretty level too. Like you're not going to snap on someone. We need to, no matter how far away somebody has fallen, especially if they are Indigenous, still treat them with love because their mental health matters.
Yeah,
and I get it. Go ahead.
With that said, in our movement, we do have a philosophy in always talking to our people with indignation. Because if we don't, then nobody will. But I have to go grab some food for my kids. So thanks for the invite and having me up here. I'll talk to you guys later, initially in your book.
I'll be around later tonight. I'll probably see you later. I am going to go ahead and take off in like 15 minutes just because it is a little bit later in the day and my partner is coming back, and so I'm going to go grab food. But I agree. I feel like we have to. I constantly worry. I'm not kind enough, anyways. But we have to figure out a way to stop invalidating other people and stop allowing stop allowing invalidation, right?
Well, I mean, so if I'm living in filth, okay, no matter how many showers I take a day, I'm gonna get an infection, right? It doesn't matter if I don't like that corner of the area that I'm existing in. It still must be cleaned. It still must be maintained for my health. And if we don't care for our people, even the ones who we're not happy with right now, that will get into us. And we see that when we see Indigenous people invalidating other Indigenous people. That's not healthy, right? So if we don't treat that, if we don't put a salve on it and talk to that person with love and respect to help heal that, it will bleed onto us.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's where my worry comes in. I mean, that's why I'm always trying to make sure that I'm talking as nice as possible and as, uplifting as possible. And as get you to understand as possible. Like, some of my words might be too direct sometimes, but it's more to kind of sometimes I feel like you can use the right word and shock somebody into understanding, right? Not like shock them, like use a horror story to shock them, but like, oh, I understand that word because of the poignancy of it more than something else, right? Like, and
Well, sometimes medicine burns.
right. And so yes, absolutely. I still also want to make sure, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's probably been a couple people on here that I've probably been a little bit too belittling on, but there've never been Indigenous people, you know, like I don't like being in the mix of the that's not what I'm here for.
I can't carry a stick as big as yours, Widda. I don't have the training to carry that stick around. Like I got a decent education, but you know, I am who I am and I got my own things, and you know, just there's some things that I'm good at and some things I'm not good at, and you know, I like the fact that, you know, you can hold the academic authority in a lot of arenas, and there are cases. I literally just saw a video of yours correcting someone, right?
Yeah.
And you were chill. You were chill with her.
Well, that's the
But
one I'm
she
talking
was-
about. You know how, oh my God, no, that one's driving me nuts already. Like that one's already making me go.
That was nasty. I almost, and I caught myself and I stopped myself. I almost left my makeup off and just like, was like, okay, you know, just stitch her quiet with come and validate me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to.
Well, and there's
You know.
already comments on it that invalidate me. Like there's already invalidating comments. And so that's where it's like, fuck, okay, I knew I shouldn't have stepped in. And so then there's already the question in my mind, you know, like,
No.
oh, I,
No,
you know,
because
yeah.
Look, you can trace your stuff back. I can trace my stuff. Obviously, I can, you know what I mean? It'd get embarrassing because we know where that mindset comes from.
Well, and that's the thing. I know I don't try and speak over others. I'm not trying to, I don't know. One of those days.
You're not speaking over anyone. A lot of us have called on you with your particular skill set. You went out into the world. What you did is you went out in the world and you got yourself a formal education to back your informal education and life experience. And you're now doing good with it actively.
Well, and to be honest, okay. I mean, I sought out the education specifically to be able to do the good. I mean, that was literally the it was, if I have this stick and I carry it into spaces, you have to hear me. Not you have to hear me, but you have to hear me, right? So yeah, no, I get that.
No, I get it. And I see it. And it's like, here's the thing. There are a lot of people who are so audacious as to, like, I don't really get too mad if somebody tries to invalidate me. Like, my feelings get hurt. I'm like, gosh, that really sucks. Ow.
Right.
Right? Like, I'm not saying it doesn't hurt it hurts my feelings. It does. You know, because I'm proud of my people. But at the end of the day, it's a little different when someone invalidates me because of what we're immersed in versus when someone invalidates someone who has more melanin than me.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. You know,
just because they don't have some paperwork or whatever. Like, this is not freaking 1936 Germany. Papers, please. Like, fucking weird. Like, God, man, I thought you'd come at me before you'd fuck with her, you know? Like,
well, I see them go after BGP, and I'm like, dude, do you need glasses?
Yeah,
I hand you mine. Like, did you need some glasses? You know, like, fuck, what do you mean you can't see that shit?
That pisses me off. Because, see, to invalidate her is to assuredly invalidate the rest of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
absolutely.
she definitely is Indigenous.
Yeah.
And not that phenotype is everything, because it's not.
No, it's not. But it makes some things obvious.
Yes. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And when I see folks... And it's not just her either. It just seems like that's an arguing point for people who don't like what she has to say. They just throw that out there, and it's like that's not a valid argument. Did you just?
Yeah.
Are you lost?
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, then the one that throws me is there's a couple that said, why does she call herself brown? And I'm like, have you seen her skin?
She
And
is.
and then the one that posted it up, and we went into that, and it's like he was like, there's not melanin, and I'm like, do you know what melanin is? Like, do you know that we all have melanin? Like, I have melanin. It's just not quite as much as yours. Like, what do you mean she has no melanin?
Well, like this is it's dangerous.
It is.
When applied to real life experience, this is dangerous, because then it goes into, like, I don't know if I've been screaming it from the tops of the hills since I read it. The dissension in the ICWA thing, where they said, okay, yeah, we saved ICWA, but a friend of mine who's a lawyer took a look at it, and he saw something, and he reminded me of something. He said that looks like they are telegraphing something to completely invalidate our sovereignty, because in the dissensions of the two who dissented was quite a bit of invalidation to our sovereignty. They said, well, like, the states have always handled this, and we should leave it to the states, but we are whole nations within those states within this country.
Right.
It's like, it's literally, we're a whole different country. Like, would you tell Russia, would you just go over there and just start policing how they are with their kids? Like, you know what I mean? And take over the placement of their children. Like, that's not, it's the same thing, that's not okay.
Speaking of, really quick, sorry, I have to ask, do you know somebody who knows tribal law?
Yes.
Are they in TikTok at all?
He has okay, so
there's a panel going this weekend, and they're looking for somebody who knows.
Oh, he's not going to hop up.
Okay.
He's not going to hop up because he's actually, no.
Okay. That makes sense. That's, I totally understand. I was just wondering, because somebody had asked me if I knew anybody who knew tribal law. And as you were talking, I remembered you had said something about tribal law in the past, so I wanted to double check. Please go on.
Yeah, but they watch. I'm just going to tell you guys that there are people there are actual people holding positions of leadership within the Indigenous community who watch these TikToks, and they're flabbergasted at how invalidating we can get and disrespectful we can get towards one another. One in particular told me, because I was talking to one of my elders about a month ago, and he was like, this is how we lost people. This is how we got our tribal numbers down so low. This is damaging. This is dangerous. This is bad. This is not what we want as a community.
Yeah.
And he was like, you say something when you run across it, right? And I was like, well, yeah, but they invalidate the shit out of me because I got pale skin. He's like, yeah, you look just fucking like us. Like, he's like, you do. He says, tell them to Google. I was like, these kids ain't gonna listen to me. And I say kids, I mean the youths that are just freshly reconnecting. And it's like, we want them. We want our people back.
Yeah. We
do want our people back. Mixed or not, we're not racist. We don't care if you're mixed. If you're disconnected and you want to reconnect, there's always a way, and where there's not a way, at least, be good to each other.
Right.
Unite, not divide. We don't need to be sectioning ourselves off and compartmentalizing. Well, this tribe over here, it's different with them because, we don't accept them because the government didn't say that they were federally recognized. Like, what? That's still an Indigenous person. You realize that prior to colonization, we mixed amongst each other, right? Like, and none of us really cared.
Yeah.
And we didn't all look exactly alike either.
Well, and that's real.
There were beefs here and there, but generally speaking, we were not racist.
That's real. The division that is here is a division that is created 100%. And it's a division that's created to keep us down and keep us in check and keep us ununited, because if we unite, it's too much for them to handle. It's how it's always been. If people were to unite, it would be too much to handle. So as long as they can keep us as you and you and you and you instead of all of yous, then, too much for them to handle. And, we're in check.
I have a suggestion. Okay. For those running around trying to arbitrate who is Indigenous enough, if you're going to do that job, get real good at your job. Here's what you do. Go to each tribe's website. Just about all of them have one. I want you to call their enrollment office. And I want you, before you invalidate anyone with that tribe, ask them what their tribe, call that tribe, call their enrollment office and say, this is the situation, this is what this person claims. Can I disrespect their heritage? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Do that, because that's about as formal as you can get.
That's real.
You know what they're going to do? They're going to say, who are you? Where are you? And why are you doing this shit to our people?
100%. Because really,
and where
honestly,
is our lost descendant?
Yeah, that's it. Because that is absolutely, I'm not going to tell you who the fuck I am unless you tell me who the fuck you are and why I should tell you first anyways. Because there are absolutely so many fucking people out there who are sitting here going, who are you? So I can invalidate you so that I can uplift those in power, right? It's not about protection half the time. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've always known the harm that Pretendians do, and that's why I've done everything to make sure that I wasn't. That's why when I wasn't sure, I wouldn't even say. Like, I couldn't even identify for half of 2020 because I had to get my DNA back and make sure after somebody had said something, and I was like, well, let me double this check. I'm going to make sure. So.
Remember, if you're going to do your job, do it well. Get on their website. I want you to read what they have to say about disconnected Indigenous peoples. I want you to read, because as you go down, hey, how do I apply for enrollment? I want you to see the encouraging words that are in there for those seeking enrollment formally. I want you to see how that is an outstretched hand. I want you to see how they've got on their websites, a lot of them, YouTube videos of people teaching the language and traditions. I want you to see how far out these tribes are reaching. I understand resources are tight sometimes, but there is an echo of a call from a lot of these Indigenous tribes to call out to their people who are validly Indigenous. So, maybe just, don't disrespect when someone's genuinely Indigenous because they don't fit your narrative. You don't know what their people are going to say until you look it up. So if you're going to do that, do your job well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think really for unity, it becomes, because the question was asked, how do we actually make that change? I think that is a great thing about, if you're going to take those actions. I think also that if we just recognize that there are, first, because we were talking about it earlier, when we're looking at that border was not put in place by anybody that was here. That border was put in place by colonizers to fight over land that they were stealing, that was populated by people who were constantly moving. So first, we must recognize that border is arbitrary. It doesn't mean anything. And therefore, anybody in North America who claims to be Indigenous to North America is Indigenous to North America, and anybody who's in South America who claims to be Indigenous to South America is Indigenous to South America. If we can recognize that indigeneity within these two spaces, the Western Hemisphere, however we want to name it, is indigeneity, period. It doesn't matter, unless you're claiming to be of a specific group, it doesn't matter who claims you. And if somebody is stating that they have Indigenous ancestry, that we should absolutely always be on track for Pretendians. We should also take people at their claim until they prove us differently.
Well, someone had asked me to validate who I was about a year or so ago because I didn't fit their narrative, right? And I was like, well, that's weird, but okay. And so I did, right? Mm-hmm. Like, cause I didn't understand on TikTok, like people like that's like a whole thing here. And so like I proved that I was Indigenous, and I'm gonna tell you, it kind of hurt my feelings, right? To be, invalidated, even if only momentarily. And yeah, I told that person, yeah, I made him look a little silly, but at the end of the day, there was somebody else that was just like listening, and it really hurt her feelings because she wasn't connected, through paperwork. And I was like, oh no. And I heard about it later.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, you know what? That's a damn good fucking point. That's a damn good fucking point, because you know what? The person who got invalidated, just because I was able to prove it to the person who was being a dick to me, and trust me, they were being mean. They were calling me some names, and I was like, oh, really? And I thought I was going to fix it, and I didn't. That's not fixing it. Doxing yourself is not fixing it.
And that's real. Well, it's like in that video, I'm not going to tell you the names of the people who are alive today. That's not even fucking happening. Like, if you think I'm going to give you that information on TikTok in the middle of the MMIW crisis, in the middle of, the lateral violence that happens, in the middle of the horrors that are going on around us, in the middle of Native children being stolen from their homes, if you think I'm going to give that information out in a public forum where anybody who wants to attack my family can do that, y'all got to be nuts, right?
Right.
And
even if you did that, what if somebody who didn't have the resources that you had to do your DNA and like do all your ancestry, and they're obviously Indigenous, to set the standard that somebody has to dox themselves and their family. Like, I get it. You start getting into a personal conversation with someone, they may have some questions, because hey, where are you from? Who are your people? Your mom and your dad, whatever. But that's on a personal level. We shouldn't set a standard that should be done publicly just because we happen to be Indigenous to this hemisphere. If there's questions, maybe take a head person who's known not to ever dox anyone or affiliate with doxers, and that's only because of the pretendian problem, right? And that should be done only when someone is sitting there speaking with authority for their tribe.
Absolutely. Well, and I feel like, I know that there are places where I grew up, people didn't give you all that information when they met you. It wasn't like you walked up and you said, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so and so-and-so. And everybody's like, if you're Indigenous, this is what you do. Everybody does this. And it's like, maybe everybody in your region, but not everybody in my region. Like, maybe everywhere where you're from, but I know groups that's not how they interact, right? Like, you got to remember that not all do.
I worry that they do this to Indigenous women, young Indigenous women. That's, some things are more important than pride.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go. I'll see you later, though. I'll probably be running around, and I'm sure you'll be live. I'll go ahead and we'll probably talk later today.
Right. So take care.
Take care, everybody. So much love to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for everybody who got up here and spoke. It is very important, especially with some of the things that we're dealing with as Indigenous people, and how to try and make some of those changes to make it a safer space for all Indigenous people. Much love. I probably will not be back until next week or next weekend. We're heading out of town tomorrow for family vacation stuff. So much love to everybody. And I'll probably be posting videos here and there, but I'll see you around. Bye, everybody.